So I already said do not skip any parts of the FRQ, but y'all just couldn't see that when I had it up there. So moving on, this was the thing somebody already asked this question, and I was just about to go through it. So if the question says to give 2 reasons, we're only allowed to read the first 2, et cetera. We just talked about that. If the question were to say identify and describe 2, well, they need 1 sentence for the identify, 3 or so sentences for the describe. Again, for the second answer, another 1 and 3. So maybe we're looking at about 8 sentences altogether for that one. So just to make sure that they're answering it completely. I tell my kids, do not restate the question or give an opening paragraph, a conclusion. I know they've learned it in English. They have been drilled and drilled and drilled that you say it, you tell them what you're going to say, you say it 3 different times, and you tell them what you just said. But this is not an essay. It's a short answer. It's a complete sentence short and a complete answer short answer, but it's not an English essay. I do not need, if I'm sitting up there grading, I have to grade like 3,000 exams in 9 days. I know the question. I know it said, like, for example, on the dam question, I do not need them to say, there are many benefits of dams, period. The first benefit is hydroelectric power, whatever. Just answer the question. The first benefit is hydroelectric power. Pace yourself. You have about 22 minutes per FRQ. If you have 90 minutes divided by 4. Now, of course, it's not like they hand out question 1, put the timer for 22 minutes, pick it up, hand them out question 2, but it's about 22 minutes each. And this is why I say to answer the math question, which should be question number 2 last, because this is where the kids are going to get hung up. This is where they're going to use a lot of time. Maybe getting a few points, most of the time not getting a whole lot of points on the math question anyway. Earned more points if they had just skipped the math question and waited till last. Then on the math question, and again, we're going to look at some in just a second, but on the math question, there's going to be questions on question 2 that are not math. So I tell my kids, once you've answered question 4, question 1, question 3, and now you're on question 2, if D and E are not math, answer D and E first. Now you can, on that, if the kid wants to answer D first, they can put D and then answer D, and then E, and then answer E, and then put A. Those can be in order because here it's labeled D. I know they're answering D. It doesn't matter if it came first or if it came fourth, but I know they're answering D. So I tell my kids to answer the parts that aren't math, and then with whatever time is left, to try the math. If the bell rings and they couldn't get the math, to sit back and say, no worries, I know I did good on everything else. If they can get the math right, and remember, they're not allowed a calculator. Moving on. Any questions, Cindy?
One more about the FRQs, asking how many you use in the class.
I give 1 FRQ on each exam because mine are just short unit exams, So I have 10 units, so they take 10 released FRQs in my class, and then at the end of a full-length 4 practice at the end, but just 1 on each test. So this next slide, what not to do. This class, if they pass this test, which a qualifying score is a 3, 4, or 5 generally, they're getting college credit. And what we're seeing is kids that are giving 3rd grade answers and expecting college credit. So, for example, they can't answer that it's going to be bad for the environment. I tell my kids, of course it's bad for the environment. It's an environmental science class. That's why they ask the question. How is it bad for the environment? It says on there, name a chemical. Don't say pollution. If it's pollution, is it air pollution? Is it water pollution? Is it methane? Is it, NOx? What is it? Name the chemical. Don't say it's going to harm biodiversity. How is it going to harm biodiversity? Is it going to cause habitat loss? Is it going to cause endangered species? They need to be more detailed. An example of that, last year I graded question number 1, which was the beetles and bee question, and they had to say that the question was talking about how the beetles were eating all the trees. And so then it said, what's going to be the environmental cost or consequence of the beetles eating all the trees? And the number of kids that said all the animals are going to lose their homes, like the little squirrels or the little birdies aren't going to have a place to live anymore. That is a 3rd grade answer. My little 3rd grade nephew could answer that. That we need a college level answer. So, something more than the little animals are going to lose their home that's not an S. Okay, so here's what we also just talked about. One giant super paragraph, really, it's better to label it. This is 1A, this is 2C, whatever, so that they know what they're saying, and Okay, I tell the kids, remember that there are environmentalists grading their tests. So I tell them, go hug the biggest tree you can find on your way into that exam. And this is not the time to play devil's advocate. This is not the time to give your political view. This is not the time to tell them how you don't believe in global warming. That they're, it's an environmental science class. They need to write pro-environment always. This one, every once in a while, they do want them to show both sides of an argument. In other words, they want them to play devil's advocate. So they'll say, give a pro and give a con. And so they're wanting the kid to contradict themselves. And just so the kids understand that they might see a question like that. Go with the most obvious answer. So when we get the rubric, we make the rubric. The table leaders and the question leaders make the rubric. And we put them in order of the most common answer at the top of the rubric, like, for instance, hydroelectric power and flood control. Those were the two first bullets because we saw that all the time, and that's true. And then as we see other answers, we add them to the rubric. Yes, there are answers out there that are true that nobody has ever heard of. So I tell my kids, I don't want you to sit there and think, oh, I couldn't sleep one time. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. I was watching the Discovery Channel, and I learned this minutia fact that nobody knows, and I'm going to write that because it's going to make me look really smart. What's probably going to happen is you're not going to get the point because nobody else knows that fact. And you can't defend your answer. You can't say, oh, well, Google it, because you're not there. So to go with the answer that I say, if y'all remember the Today Show with Jay Leno, when he would go jaywalking, what's the answer that most people are going to give? That's what you want. And then finally, if you don't know a law, if it asks for a law, it hasn't asked for a law in a number of years. But if it does ask for a law in the FRQ and you don't know the law, if it talks about animals, I would go with the Endangered Species Act. If the question has something to do with water, I would go with the Clean Water Act. And if it has something to do with air, I would go with the Clean Air Act because probably they're going to work. They always have. Obviously, if the answer is the air, don't go with the Clean Water Act. That's not going to make any sense. Obviously, if you don't know a law, at least your guess. If we look at, I just pulled 2010 to look at, and I want to just very quickly look at the scoring statistics in case you haven't. The means here. So question number 1, the DBQ. We say at the reading, the dream is still alive. In other words, everyone in the nation answers question number 1. And therefore, question number 1 is generally pretty high scoring because you don't get a lot of blame. Then they hit question number 2. And if they're going to quit, that's where they're going to quit. And it's the math question, and it's usually the lowest scoring question, as you can see it was in 2010. And then 3 and 4. And 4 is the second lowest scoring question on these examples when it's probably you're going to see a pretty easy question. So let's look at the examples. Where did they go? They have disappeared.
Now that you've enlarged it, we can read it.
Yeah. Okay, so here's question number 1. Always the Fremont Gazette or the Fremont Inquirer or something, and they have to read a little story about something and answer some questions. So that's what question number 1 is going to look like. Now, AI, AII, they need a label like that. Don't glob everything into A. AI, answer AI, AII, answer AII, etc.